In The Sopranos, New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano's way of living has major impact on those around him. Those within his sphere of influence can often find themselves party to advantages, like his wife Carmela, pretty much blackmailing a neighbor's sister into writing a letter of recommendation for her daughter. However, others, like Artie Bucco, has his restaurant set on fire by Tony, which devastates him, even though Tony was trying to make the best of a bad situation and help his friend out. But when it comes to non-family members, when it comes to non-friends, when it comes to gangsters who are not made guys, when it comes to non-Italian-American medigans, when it comes to Adriana's pussy, nothing is off limits to the predatory nature of La Cosa Nostra members. The rest of the world, whether they be business owners, government officials, or even local gardeners, exist to be exploited and often stolen from, squeezed dry. Sal Vitro, for his close proximity to mobsters, has his arm broken and is forced to do work for free because of a bust-up between two greaseballs, Paulie and Feach. Numerous innocents get in the way and are punished due to the mob's greed or bloodlust, like the two Ukrainians who are taken out instead of Phil Leotardo during this Season 6 mob war. Today I wanted to talk a little about one such victim of Tony and the mob, Davey Scatino, played by Cyberdyne System model T1000. Davey heard about Tony taking over the executive game from his uncle, and once in, Tony repeatedly warns him that these games are high stakes and they're not for him, but he is desperate to join, even after already being in debt to the frightening Richie Aprile, and he's already struggling to pay off that debt. At the executive game, he borrows more money from the house while Tony sleeps and ends up in major debt. After this, he tries to avoid Tony, borrow from Artie, sell his son's car to Tony, and eventually Tony and his crew have Davey pay off his debt through the store he owns, buying loads of stuff the mob will sell off that Davey will never repay, eventually filing for bankruptcy. Davey spends his kid's college fee, he lashes out at his brother-in-law at one point, and even seems to try to take his own life in one scene. Davey moves out of Jersey, intending to work on a ranch in Vegas, something Tony snides at as it's literally the home of gambling. And the last we hear of him is Meadow telling her father he is now in a mental health facility. Victim is probably not the first word that comes to mind when talking about Davey. He is a very snivelling, pathetic, weak character who projects and blames his own problems onto others, like his brother-in-law Vic in the bar, or telling his son he's taking away his car because of his off-roading. He damages his family's prospects, like when he gambles away his son's college funds, and he practically begged his way into Tony's pocket, who gave him numerous warnings to stay out of the game, even though he could have easily been predatory and said, "Yeah, Davey, come along, it'll be fun." But hey, this is my Why You're Wrong series, where we take a look at characters from alternate angles, and I actually think Davey isn't as bad as he's made out. To be fair, a lot of this video is going to be about Tony more than Davey, and it's partly inspired by comments I got in my video I did on the bust out in Goodfellas, where I used the Tony-Davey situation as an example of how the mob preys on the weak and vulnerable with bust outs. A lot of people felt it wasn't actually a bust out, simply a matter of a grown man who made a wager, he lost, he made another wager, he lost again.
End of story.
And Davey deserved what he got, no question. He was weak, he was out of control, and he had become such an embarrassment that his wife ended up leaving him. He's a scumbag loser, and if he was my brother-in-law, I'd have as much contempt for him as did Vic Musto. In fact, my major point in this video isn't some great analysis about him being a tragic, misunderstood character. It's just that I just kind of feel a bit sorry for the dude. That's really it. You can lament the idiotic nature of a character who gets his up-and-comings, while at the same time having empathy for him, especially for his family who had to suffer because of his actions. His story is a cringe-inducing car crash that's only entertaining because it isn't happening to you or anyone you know, because it's happening to a fictional character. In fact, the ripple effect from the Davey situation affected loads of characters, from Tony, Richie, Meadow, Davey's son and wife, Carmela, and others. It's difficult to argue for Davey. As he said himself, he's a big boy. But I want to bat for the guy a little, and the angle I'm approaching this video from is that Davey's a degenerate gambling addict. It's not an addiction I completely understand. There's more of a psychological aspect to it than a tangible one like smoking, drinking or drugs, but experts have compared it to these kind of addictions and it is clearly a real phenomenon, a dangerous one at that. And Davey is presented as an unsympathetic character. I particularly detested the way he kept bringing up the children to soften Tony up.
I wouldn't do anything to insult you. Our kids go to the same school together.
But let's say you had someone like Bubbles from The Wire, who fans adore and who is portrayed sympathetically. He tried many times to give up his drug addiction and failed on numerous occasions with disastrous results. If someone dangled a WMD in front of him and he succumbs to taking a few hits, yeah, it's his fault. But there is an element where you do feel for the guy. And Davey has atypical gambling addict dialogue.
I'm gonna come back. My luck's gonna change.
As if they lifted the dialogue straight from a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, which, by the way, the Davey actor attended for preparation. My argument in this video is that Tony intentionally manipulated Davey, and he always planned to rinse him dry. I'm actually surprised this isn't a more common belief held by fans, as it seems most feel Tony is completely innocent of blame. And maybe it is up to interpretation, but I think Tony definitely was playing the long game, as I'll get into. First off, Tony was aware he had a reputation for gambling.
No, it's just, you know me. I like to play a little.
A little. Forget it.
It's brought up a few times by Davey's wife, for instance, so it's clearly a known thing that Davey has a gambling issue. Maybe there were incidents in the past. In these cases, you'd take care with friends like these, but I think Tony saw an opportunity that walked into his lap. It's interesting that Davey used to go to Gamblers Anonymous, and Tony then played a part in his relapse, as he did with Christopher, who used to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, who relapsed partly because of Tony. It just shows how much of a negative influence Tony is to the vulnerable around him. Anyway, the overarching theme of this story is not, "Ha! Look at this loser, snivelling gambler. Look how weak he is compared to the alpha strong Tony Soprano." No, it's, look how the mob preys on the vulnerable and destroys lives. Loan sharking is literally an entire industry that the mob thrived in. This point is emphasized by the season finale ending montage showing the Sopranos happy celebrating Meadows' graduation, juxtaposed with the negative effects they have on the environment, including Davey, who is shown packing up and leaving town. Here is a man who started off as the head of a family, as a store owner, and ended up broke after a few interactions with Tony Soprano. It could be argued that Tony, the great manipulator that he is, was not helping Davey, telling him to stay away from the executive game, but baiting him, knowing Davey's nature and playing on it, making sure the hook is nice and tight before he starts pulling. He hurts Davey's ego by saying, "These guys play deep," which Davey follows up with his comments about how many jock straps he sold, so clearly it hit a nerve. And an important factor to consider is that Davey was already in debt to Richie. Of course, we could argue he should have sorted that out before getting into another game, but with Rich banning Davey from any future games, Davey's main means to repaying Richie was blocked off. Maybe that's why he was trying so hard to get into the executive game. He saw it as his way of paying off Richie, because he knew if he couldn't, he'd be screwed with his debt to Rich. When you look at it from that point of view, his actions make a little more sense. Tony ropes him in. He tells him what kind of game is being played, explains his relationship to Frank Sinatra Jr., sir, and then tells him it isn't a game for him, after practically doing a Jordan Belfort sales pitch. Turning Davey down also allows Tony to remove any guilt he might feel over this situation. He'd always be able to say, "Well, I warned him." But come on, it's not as if Davey can twist Tony Soprano's arm into making a decision. If Tony really tried, Davey would not have gotten into that game. Yes, Tony gave him chances to avoid this whole situation, but that basically involved Tony very lightly saying no a few times before pulling out the welcome wagon for Davey and getting him a seat at the table. And moving on to where Tony wakes up and is told by Chris that Davey claims he okayed more cash for him while Tony was asleep, this of course looks very bad on Davey. He's broken Tony's trust in a manner of speaking. But if you listen carefully, Chris says Davey grabbed another 10 boxes of ZT, taking him to 45 in total.
About a winner this time. I'll do the best I can.
How much is he into us for?
About 45 boxes is eating.
King of hearts. Ace
What?
of hearts.
He grabbed another 10 while you were asleep. He said you okay.
But that still means Tony allowed him to go to 35 with no issue. It's framed like Davey has gone behind Tony's back and made a huge blunder after he loses a lot of money, which Tony never okayed. But it was only 10 grand after Tony had already okayed 35. And once Davey was in Tony's pocket, there was no longer a need for a ruse. Tony's attitude immediately changes. Somewhat justified, sure, but now it becomes a very typical relationship of a mobster hounding a person in debt for money. What swings it for me is the conversation in the store when Tony catches Davey asleep.
Why'd you let me do it? Well, I knew you had this business here, Davey. It's my nature. Frog and a scorpion, you know? What's the end? Planned bankruptcy. Hey, you're not the first guy to get busted out. This is how a guy like me makes a living. This is my bread and butter.
I mean, this surely sells it that Tony has always had a bust out in mind, right? The cobwebs are now removed. It's low-key one of the scariest scenes in the show. Tony just belatedly saying to Davey, I'm going to ruin your life, and this was always my goal. He and his friends messing around in the store while Davey is literally sleeping in it, utterly powerless at the fact that he's being intentionally bled dry, and he's even complicit in his own downfall. This is a school friend of Tony, who had a vulnerable gambling problem and was entrapped, with his business and life driven into the ground, slowly and deliberately. It's pretty sickening. Davey is a mark, a target, just like the owner of the crazy horse which Chris gave to Adriana, just like old man Satrial who had his fingers chopped off and his business taken away, and most likely just like whoever owned the Bing before the mobsters got involved, and just like what JT Dolan becomes for Christopher, even though they started off as friends helping each other with rehab. These guys, these mobsters, are scum. They're leeches. Tony played Davey and justified it to Meadow by saying Davey was a grown man who made a wager, just like Tony's father justified what Tony saw by saying Satrial was a degenerate gambler and it was his own fault. This is literally a business model for the mob, and if you think Tony is completely innocent in this storyline, honestly, maybe he has pulled the wool over your eyes too. He treated a childhood friend like a relentless vulture. He even sent people to Davey at night to scare the guy, and they lit a fire in his dumpster.
They're animals, Vic. They started a fire in my dumpster, and then these two guys came to see me one night. Look, you got no idea what dead eyes means until you face these people.
With that being said, it's open to interpretation whether Tony always planned the bust out or whether he got the idea somewhere along the lines. Perhaps after he woke up and knew Davey was 45k into him. Maybe he was angry that Davey usurped his authority, or maybe he thought, this guy is going to crash and burn anyway, it might as well be me who profits from it. Sure, Davey survived well enough, it could have been worse for him, but he split from his family, lost his business, and from what Meadows said, his gambling problems must have continued, eventually landing him in a mental facility, implying he may have even gone as far as to lose his marbles. This guy is just a hopeless, pathetic guy, as personified by one of his last scenes where he struggles to get the coffee machine working and then crushes his cup in defeat. Tony walks over and the coffee machine works fine for him. Some people are just losers. So what do you think? Does Davey, a sleazy and unlikable guy, deserve some sympathy, or should I discontinue the lithium? Let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.